This was the 6th day of play at the IGC Zuerich Chess Challenge, and there were signs of tiredness from the players. Nakamura and Gelfand drew fairly quickly. There was really not too much going on there. There was nothing creative. Anand played very solidly against Magnus Carlsen, but, well, Carlsen responded in kind and then reached a drawn endgame very quickly. And that left just one game going. That was between Fabiano Caruana and Levon Aronian. If Aronian could win, of course, he would catch up Carlsen, so he had a lot to play for. This was the position they reached after 24 moves. Caruana has white. Now, Caruana, I think, has played a very clever opening. In response to Aronian's martial gambit, he played a solid line, but he's kept a minimal edge. He hasn't tried to refute the opening, but you can see that white is just a little bit better here. Compare the pawn structures. Black has split pawns here, whereas white's pawns are together and even protect this very nice bishop in the middle of the board. Now, in compensation for these split pawns, you could say that black has the two bishops, and that's a real asset in the endgame. But the question is, can black use them? I think this is a clever choice from Caruana because, of course, Aronian wanted to play for a win, no doubt about that. But in this position, really the best that black can hope for is a draw, and it's a bit depressing to play this kind of position. So here's how the game went. Rook to a6, threatening the bishop, and that bishop retreated. So you can see that white is already very active, and this is a nice manoeuvre from Caruana, swinging the knight round to this very nice square, hitting the bishop, and where it would hit the pawn on d5. Aronian played a good move. He eliminates one of those isolated pawns. He exchanges it off. Knight comes in as advertised, and the bishop moves, and the rook attacks this pawn. Now, exchange of pawns. It's going to be difficult to take that pawn because you've got to remember that there's potentially a bishop check here. You've got to watch out how you capture that pawn, but certainly white has pressure here. And now Aronian played this move, and this looks like a mistake. Of course, the rook can't take the pawn because of bishop e4 check, but what Caruana did was very clever. He moved the rook down here. So there are all these funny pins. Now, black's problem is that if he moves the bishop away, then white wins material like this. If the bishop is taken, then rook takes rook. So the only way, or surprisingly, the only way that black can free himself is by blocking the bishop. Now that doesn't look fatal, but let's see what happens in a couple of moves. So Caruana improves his king position, just plugs those light squares. Good idea, so this bishop isn't so strong. Now the bishop comes out. If the rooks are exchanged, then with the bishops, then black has very good drawing chances, so Caruana avoids that. And this highlights the problem with moving the f6 pawn. You can see that the 7th rank is a lot weaker. If that pawn was still on f7, black's king would be in a better situation. But the 7th rank is now extremely weak, and this is very unpleasant for black to play. We've seen this in several games in this tournament where one side, well actually white, conquers the 7th rank. Actually in the middle game, well in one endgame, in Carlsen's endgame actually against Gelfand, but in the middle game as well, and this is very nasty. And from this moment on, Aronian, I think, was struggling in the game. Now slowly but surely Caruana has managed to round up that pawn, so now he's a pawn to the good, and still with very nice coordination. White's pieces are very nice. King came here, And now, what's the next step? Well, if this pawn is advanced too quickly, then actually the bishop will lose its support, and that's a bit problematic. So Caruana kept the pawn here so that it protects the bishop, everything rock solid so black can't touch it, and instead started the squeeze on the king side. By advancing the pawns, you're going to cramp black's king, and that's another target that white has. You can try for a checkmating attack. So excellent play from Caruana, and sometimes even there's, you can threaten to sacrifice a piece here. So Caruana just keeping control. This is a nice maneuver. The knight protects the king and wants to reroute itself to this very nice square. And now the squeeze with the pawns continues on the king side. Sometimes it might just be that white wants to put the pawn on h5 just to cramp the king. Sometimes you can even play for g5 in order to break through to the g7 pawn. So this is a very nasty position, and somehow black's coordination doesn't look as good now. I mean, the real problem is the king, of course. At some moment white is always going to get a counter-attack. So there we go, the rook returns to the 7th rank, and now the knight comes up. So this starts to be a real possibility, g5 opening up the position to get through to g7. And well, this bishop was on prise. This is not an easy situation for black. Caruana blocked, and after the exchange, then I think we can definitely say this is looking brilliant for white. With the exchange of the bishop pair, Aronian loses his big asset in this position. But I mean, perhaps he had to do it by this stage, but it's a very unpleasant position. And just white, it's really nice the way Caruana plays it. He keeps everything just completely compact. There is no weakness for the rook or the bishop to attack here. Everything is together in white's position. So he continues the squeeze on the king side. And now plays knight in. It's looking desperate. I mean, you can see in some situations how, well, for example, if the bishop came here and the rook checked, if the king comes up in this position, you can see how white could very easily start a mating attack against black's king. So this is why white squeezed with these kingside pawns gaining space. So after rook check, the king came here, and now an excellent move from Caruana. The c-pawn advanced, attacking the bishop. If that's taken, then white wins material. The knight hits the rook, and the rook attacks the bishop, and if rook here, then knight d6 check wins. So the bishop retreated. The problem now is that the bishop can't help to defend the king, so the knight is free to come to this square, and you can see white has triumphed finally on the 7th rank, and now it is absolutely over. Well, Aronian managed to take this pawn here on f3, but white's king has broken through, and well, you can see after a couple more moves, basically, Caruana managed to take this last pawn on the king side, and well, you don't even need this c-pawn. With these two connected pass pawns plus the king, it's going to be mate, or one of the pawns is going to go through very easily, and well, in a few moves after that, white won. I thought that was a very carefully played game by Fabiano Caruana, and it shows that he has real potential for the future. Remember, he is younger than Magnus Carlsen. He's only 21 years old. Great game. So that left the scores after the 5 rounds of classical chess. Magnus Carlsen in first place with 8 points. Remember, it's 2 points for a win, 1 for a draw. Carlsen with 8. Aronian with 6 points, Caruana 5 points, Nakamura 4, Anand 4 and Gelfand 3. Tomorrow, Tuesday, they play a rapid play tournament where it's 1 point for a win, half for a draw. So, well, Aronian could still catch Carlsen, we'll see, but it might just turn into a lap of honour for Magnus Carlsen. Thanks for watching.